Welcome back, AP. So I'm gonna try and keep this one short and sweet. It's actually about a very, very short time period. We're gonna talk about kind of like the fight for liberalism in France, right? The revolution in France. The reason why I call it a revolution is it's much more about the idea of like spreading ideas. It only took like 3 days, so I don't really consider it like a full-fledged revolution, right? So, because the 1789 revolution, if you count Napoleon's era, lasted all the way from 1789 to 1814. It was rife with different phases. It was saw the extreme shift in governmental power. So I consider that a revolution, not so much this one as much. But first off, let's rewind, right? Because we've been jumping all over the place in AP Euro because that's kind of the nature of the class. But today in class, we got all the way up to like the 1840s with the Great Famine of Ireland. Well, let's rewind back to like 1814 real quick. So in 1814, when Napoleon abdicates the throne and leaves after the failed invasion of Russia, Louis the 18th is going to be brought back into power. Now, first and foremost, he's a Bourbon, all right? The Bourbons, as we know, have been in charge of France since Henry IV, going all the way back to St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, like we talked about, and the Edict of Nantes. But Louis the 18th is going to be brought back in after the reign of Napoleon in 1814. He's going to protect the gains of the middle class and the peasantry from the French Revolution. So he's going to become more liberal in that sense. He's going to sign this thing called the Constitutional Charter of 1814, where he actually protects these rights of freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, things like that. Then the 100 Days are going to happen. Thanks a lot, Napoleon, where he comes back and for 100 days tries to remobilize and rule over France. But of course, we know at the Battle of... Good job, Nick Hughes. The Battle of Waterloo, right? Thank you, Noodles. That he's just going to be deposed, right? So after that, Louis will be reinstated again. But the aristocrats are beginning to demand, like the ones that were in England, right? The old school nobles are demanding to go back to the old ways. They demand that they want to go back to the way, way back in the day of the ancient order in France, the ancient regime in France, the old order, splitting it back up into classes, separating everyone apart from each other. However, he refuses to do this, right? So he saves the ideas of liberalism in the revolution in France, right? Well, it's not going to last for forever because Louis is going to establish one major new thing. He's going to establish, I'm like moving myself down here so you can see it, but he establishes the French Parliament known as the Chamber of Deputies, right? It's a bicameral parliament. It's much more fair, and it involves the voting and the regulation of new deputies and lawmakers in France. The Chamber of Deputies is very important. Go ahead and put a star next to it. So he's going to be replaced, though, after his reign is over. He's going to be replaced by his super conservative family member, Charles X, right? He's one of his cousins, I believe. But Charles X is actually directly related to Louis the 16th and to the 14th and the 15th, the entire Bourbon dynasty as well. He's a Bourbon. So Charles X is going to come in. Thing about Charles X, he's crazy conservative, super, super conservative, wants to go agree with the aristocrats and go back to the old ways. So one of his early ways of showing the old ways of France is that he wants to try and extend the French reach, right? He decides that he wants to try and extend their empire status and go and invade Algeria in northern Africa and strip that land from the Muslims that actually control it. So this happens in 1831. Now, crazy thing happens. Within 3 weeks, they go in there, they invade, they knock out a bunch of early, they have a bunch of early scuffles with the Algerian Muslims. They take the capital city within 3 weeks. However, the Muslims are going to revolt underneath them, and they're going to actually establish a very fearsome war that lasts all the way up until 1847. However, the French are going to come away with the win, and while he's feeling himself, right, because Charles is like, we've extended French colonialism. People are now borrowing land from us again. The Italians and the Spaniards, they're starting to set up colonies in Algeria, and it's all because of us, right? He decides to repudiate the Constitutional Charter of 1814, the revolutionary one, the one that the guy that came right before him, Louis XVIII, signed into complete, what's the word I'm looking for? Into complete validation and actually brought in and protected the liberal ideas of the French Revolution. So he's going to strip voting rights away from many wealthy middle-class members. He's going to censor the press and tell them you're not allowed. He's going to close down press shops. He's going to raid them. And he's going to say you're not allowed to write anything negative about the new and current regime of France. You can't say anything negative towards us, and you can't say anything like you have to actually have your paper censored. That is why Delacroix is going to actually create this painting, this Lady Liberty, leading the people, right? So these are actually supposed to be talking about the July Revolution in France, okay? It only took 3 days, 3 little baby days. Started the 28th of July and went all the way up to the 30th of July, right? So inspired by the revolution, the printers are going to begin, they're all going to come together, and a group of printers are like, we're tired of this guy seizing our papers, censoring our ideas, and telling us we can't do things. Isn't that right, Rufio? Rufio. Yeah, some of y'all didn't even realize he's ran right here. Okay, anyway. So, but they're going to decide that they're going to issue these papers and try to spread the spirit of this religion or the spirit of this revolution around. It's going to be like, Parisians, take heed, assemble, down with the Bourbons, right? So the 3 glorious days are going to happen then. You can also put in parentheses next to this the July Revolution. That's how long it took for the French government to collapse and for Charles to flee and abdicate the throne, right? Because, well, 5 days if you count like the whole, like he abdicates and he runs away and all this other stuff. So the French are going to begin to issue all of these papers out, right? And on the first day, Royal Guardsmen are going to begin to come under like pseudo attack of protesters, right? A lot of Parisian protesters are going to assemble, and they're going to start threatening that they're going to be taking their country back again and things like that. And then on the second day, the Royal Guardsmen begin to assemble in the streets and like the grand spaces that to prevent these protests from happening again. And I love this event in the second day. Actually, this is a good picture of it right here. All manner of objects began to rain down on the Royal Guardsmen. They started throwing chests, and they started throwing dressers and pots and flower pots and pans and like bottles and all this other stuff at all of these Royal Guardsmen. And then actually that's when the first violent outbreak happens. And a lot of Royal Guardsmen started shooting warning shots into the air when this started happening, but then they actually turned their guns on the people and killed 21 protesters. And then like the protesters lifted up one of the dead bodies of the protesters, and they started walking through the streets of Paris with it, saying like, down with the Bourbons, like we won't let this happen again. That's where, of course, Delacroix like gains his inspiration, is from the second day of the July Revolution. And then and then as time progressed, even on the third day, they're getting very, very violent, and all it took was 3 days for the Parisians to actually overpower the Royal Guard and the Royal Military and take over. They also, in one night, this will blow your mind. Remember what I said during the French Revolution? If barricade building was an Olympic sport, the French would win gold every time. They built 4,000 barricades in one night. 4,000 barricades all over France, or all throughout the streets of Paris, to block the movement of the royal troops in one night. And in 3 days, they took their country back, right? So during this process, Louis Philippe is going to come in after Charles abdicates and flees, okay? So Charles X leaves, and Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, the Orleanian party, is going to come in. Now, he's considered liberal early on, and a lot of people believe this is just to curry favor with some of the revolutionaries and the poor. He said, I am not the French king, but I am simply the king of the French people, right? You're a big fat liar and you got a goofy haircut, all right? Now, anyway, so he's considered liberal because he's going to extend the voting rights back to the people, but he's only going to grow the voting population from 100,000 to 170,000. As you can tell, this entire era of reforms and revolutions, a lot of it's about voting rights, a lot of it's about liberal movements throughout the poor and the middle class, a lot of it is about taking this aristocracy, these old ways, down a peg or two and creating more fair and representable legislative bodies, right? Now, but that's about it. He's going to anger a lot of French liberals when he comes in, because a lot of them felt like they were cheated after the July Revolution because he actually wasn't as liberal as he said he was. So that's it. All right. So that's the July Revolution in France. And so far, remember, we talked about the liberal movements in Greece and how Greece finally had a victory for liberalism when everybody helped them out to banish the Ottoman Turks out. We talked about liberal reform in Great Britain with the Corn Laws and the Anti-Corn League and the Battle of Peterloo, right? Stuff like that. And then we talked about the Great Famine in Ireland and how that was kind of a fight for liberalism, but it didn't really happen at all, and it really, really affected the relations between Great Britain. And then we talked about the French one as well, the 3-day revolution, with the installing of a new dynasty, if you will. The Bourbons are donezo after Charles X, right? And the Orleanians take over. So this right here, that is Louis Philippe. Louis Philippe, the Orleanian, is going to take the throne, right? And so getting into it tomorrow, we got to talk about 3 countries: Prussia, Austria, and France. Now they're going to have actual legit revolutions. And actually throughout 1848, there was like 75 active revolutions going on in 1 year throughout all of Europe. So this is like the death of the aristocracy. But we'll get into that stuff tomorrow. And also we're going to get into what Kev Carr thinks about milk, apparently, tomorrow as well. So we'll see you tomorrow, all right? Remember, Friday we're reviewing. We're going to play Grudge Ball again on Friday. And then Monday we have your next test. So we'll see you guys later, AP.